Among the unanswered questions of Middle-earth, the most sorrowful is the question of what happened to the Entwives and why they vanished. Why did the female Ents, who once lived happily with the male Ents, leave their homelands and go away? And what happened to them?
Greetings everyone, welcome to Middle-earth Tales. Today we will try to find the answer to what might have happened to the Entwives. What happened that caused the Entwives to leave their males all alone and go away? I use an AI clone of my own voice in my videos. I do this to provide you with a more fluent experience, but if you would like to learn the details, you can check out the About Me video. Let's get started.
There are two parts to the question regarding the Entwives. The first is the question of why they left their men and their homelands, to which we have an answer. The second is the question of what happened to them, to which we can only partially give an answer. The Ents, just like individuals belonging to other peoples, were created as couples. They were the creations of Yavanna. When Yavanna heard that her spouse Aula had made the dwarves, and that Iluvatar had later given them life, she grew worried. Because Aule, though well-intentioned, was an impulsive character who showed very little interest in things that did not come from his own hands, and who did not think much about the consequences of his actions. She feared that the dwarves he created would cause damage to the nature of Middle-earth, and she made the Ents to protect the forests. Just like the dwarves, Iluvatar gave consciousness to the Ents, and thus the protectors of the forests began to walk upon the earth. It is probable that they too awoke after the awakening of the elves. Even though they were created as couples, there was a very important divergence between male Ents and female Ents in terms of their worldview. It was this divergence that lay at the core of the Entwives' departure. Although Ents appeared to outsiders as if they all looked alike, each actually had their own unique physical characteristics. And these characteristics also varied between the males and the females. Since there was almost no one in the history of Middle-earth, at least in the Third Age, who saw the Entwives, we only know what they looked like from what Treebeard said. The Entwives had hair the color of ripe corn, looking as if they were sun-baked, and their cheeks were as red as apples. The Ents lived for a very long time in their forests by themselves, and what forests they were indeed. It is said that in the first age of the sun, a squirrel could jump from branch to branch from Rivendell all the way to the Great Sea. Of course, it is possible that there is a piece of exaggeration in this definition, but what truly matters is the size of the forests the Ents lived in. Yet, it is clear that the population of the Ents was not sufficient to protect these vast forests. Whether through natural means or by human hands, these forests diminished as centuries passed. In particular, the men of Numenor ruthlessly cut down the forests in Eriador and carried them to their own country. Because on the island of Numenor, trees were a scarce resource. Despite this, we have no evidence that the Ents entered into a conflict with Numenor. Furthermore, there is no information indicating that the Ents were involved in the major events of the ages. It is understood that along with the shrinking of the forests, they continuously changed their living spaces. And so, this may have been the exact time when the disagreement between the male Ents and the Entwives first began. Because the Entwives wanted to venture outside the forests, the reason for this was simple. The male Ents found peace in the forest itself. They loved the trees and watched over them. However, they did not intervene in the forest. They did not plant new saplings or try to shape the forest with their own hands. But the Entwives, perhaps due to an instinct that came from fertility, wanted to grow new things with their hands. They felt a great admiration for flowers, loved fruit and vegetable plants, and preferred small trees and bushes over mighty trees. For all of this, they needed space, and the forest floor did not clear any room for them to establish their gardens or to grow their fruits and vegetables. At first, they established gardens and orchards for themselves at the edge of the forest. Here, they grew the various fruits, vegetables, and flowers they desired. On the other hand, since the Ents did not consume solid food, they might have given their produce, especially the fruits and vegetables, to other peoples. Although the Ents withdrew to their own lands and broke off relations with others in the Third Age, this was not the case in earlier ages. It is probable that just as the elves taught the Ents how to speak, the Ents may have taught the elves and men about gardening and agriculture. It was during this period that the male Ents lived happily in their forests, and the female Ents lived happily in their gardens at the edge of the forests. Both sides were doing what made them happy in the world. But then, the areas at the edge of the forest began to be insufficient for the Entwives. They started to dream of more vast and fertile lands, and it was then that the first departure took place. The Entwives left Fangorn Forest altogether, crossed the Anduin River, and came to the vast plateau that would be named the Brown Lands in the Third Age. To the north of this area, elves lived in the Great Greenwood, which would later be named Mirkwood, and Northmen lived to the east. To the southeast lay Mordor. However, since this journey of the Entwives took place at the beginning of the Second Age, neither the Rings of Power nor the One Ring had been made yet, and Sauron was still hiding in an unknown place. It is highly probable that the Entwives took their female children with them during this journey. Because according to what Treebeard also said, back when the Entwives were around, there were Ent children too. But after they left, there was never an Ent child again. This means that the women took the female Ent children along with them as they departed. And so, this community consisting only of females established their gardens and orchards in this vast land they had arrived at. Thanks to this, the plain turned into a colorful, sweet-smelling place. During this period, the males and females were still visiting each other. That is to say, the Entwives were far away, but they were not yet lost. Centuries passed, and Sauron emerged and grew powerful. He thought that this place right beside him was supplying provisions to his enemies. Sauron did not harbor a hatred for everything beautiful like his master Melkor did. His goals were strictly practical. The Entwives were producing food supplies, and this was bad for him. Thus, Sauron attacked. He did not just trample and destroy the gardens and orchards, he also killed the soil so that nothing could ever be grown on these lands again. When the male Ents came to visit their women, they encountered completely dry, exhausted lands with not even a single blade of grass upon them. As for the Entwives, they were nowhere to be found. This is the answer to the question of why the Entwives left their men and where they went. To answer the second question, the question of what happened to them, we have no definitive information. We can only speculate. First of all, we can think that when Sauron attacked, the Entwives stood up against him, and many of them were killed in the process. Some of them might have escaped. Samwise Gamgee's father, Hamfast, claims that there was a walking tree. He might have indeed seen it, but there is also a possibility that what he saw was a male Ent or a horn. The second possibility is that some of the Entwives escaped, but later lost their purpose, took root, and became tree-like in the places they fled to. Since it would be impossible to distinguish a tree-turned Ent from a normal tree, they might have blended into the forests and vanished. Tolkien addressed this subject in two of his letters. According to them, a portion of the Entwives might have been taken captive by Sauron. These Ents were enslaved to feed Sauron's army. They were probably settled around Lake Nirn and forced to produce food. However, even if this was the case, these enslaved Ents either died or escaped by the end of the Second Age. Because when the last alliance defeated Sauron and peace returned to Middle-earth for at least another 1,500 years, the Entwives still did not appear. Tolkien stated that the Entwives and the male Ents would never reunite in this world again. As for what kind of place they will go to when they die, that is known only by Ilúvatar. So, that is the story of the Entwives. I hope you enjoyed it, and until we meet in the next video, take care of yourselves.